Welcome to MantleSaga, where superhero legends begin. What happens when the ultimate symbol of hope decides that hope is no longer enough? What happens when Superman looks at a broken world and decides the only way to save it is to make it fear him? Today, we are exploring one of the darkest Superman transformations ever imagined, Yellow Lantern Superman. In DC lore, fear is not just an emotion. It is a force in the emotional spectrum, a cosmic energy that can be focused, weaponized, and given form through the yellow light. That is what made Sinestro so dangerous. He abandoned the idea that order should be built through courage and decided it could be enforced far more effectively through terror. A yellow lantern ring chooses wielders who can instill fear in others, and the more fear they can channel, the more dangerous they become. Like other power rings, it grants flight, shields, energy projection, and hard light constructs, but its most sinister edge is psychological. It can pry into the mind, expose a victim's deepest terror, and turn fear itself into a weapon sharp enough to break resistance before the fight is even over. That alone would make the yellow ring terrifying in the hands of almost anyone. But Superman changes the equation immediately. Because once fear is added to a being who already moves like a force of nature and hits with the weight of a living catastrophe, the question stops being how strong he is and becomes something much darker. What happens when one of DC's greatest symbols no longer inspires hope, but commands fear? The horror of Yellow Lantern Superman is not just the power boost, it is the inversion. Superman has always represented the idea that overwhelming power can still choose mercy, restraint, and compassion. Wrap him in the light of fear, and that same silhouette begins to mean something else entirely. Not rescue descending from the sky, but judgment. That is what makes the concept so powerful in comic book mythology. This is not just Superman with another weapon. It is the possibility of Superman becoming emotionally, symbolically, and cosmically aligned with terror itself. And once that possibility opens, the entire meaning of Superman begins to shift with it. DC is full of powerful beings, but Superman has always been more than raw force. Plenty of characters can destroy worlds, threaten universes, or stand toe-to-toe with gods. What sets Superman apart is that his power carries moral meaning. He is not just strong enough to rule the world. He is the man who chooses not to. That is why a yellow lantern ring is so dangerous on him. It does not simply add range or versatility to his already absurd abilities. It attacks the emotional role Superman plays in the DC universe. The person who normally stabilizes panic becomes someone who can amplify it, feed on it, and use it to dominate the people who once trusted him. Even without a ring, Superman is already one of the most overwhelming beings in comics. His strength has no clean upper boundary, his body can survive punishments that would destroy armies, and his senses allow him to perceive the world with impossible precision. But what makes Superman truly inspiring is not that he can do almost anything. It is that he usually refuses to abuse that fact. A yellow lantern ring twists that restraint into something harsher. Flight becomes the arrival of unavoidable force. Heat vision becomes not just destruction, but intimidation. Superhearing becomes the ability to detect weakness everywhere. The ring does not change the fact that Superman is powerful. It changes the emotional meaning of that power. There is also a deeper irony here. Superman has always stood much closer to hope than fear, even outside the formal color symbolism of the lantern mythos. He is the figure people search for in smoke and darkness, because his presence means survival is still possible. To see that same figure wrapped in yellow light is to watch the universe's emotional order break in real time. That is why Yellow Lantern Superman feels larger than a gimmick. He is not just stronger Superman. He is Superman transformed into a warning, a version of the hero whose greatest threat is not only what he can destroy, but what he now represents. And once that idea is established, the next question becomes unavoidable. When has DC actually let Superman step into that darkness? In main continuity, Superman's connection to Yellow Lantern power comes through Parallax, the living embodiment of fear itself. The story begins with children vanishing, fear spreading not through spectacle at first, but through absence and dread. When Superman investigates, he discovers the truth quickly. This was never random. It was a trap designed to lure him in. Parallax did not want the children. It wanted Superman's body. A near indestructible host, powered by one of the most physically dominant beings in the DC universe, would turn fear into something almost unstoppable. And more than that, Parallax understood the symbolic damage. If fear could wear Superman's face, then terror would not just gain power, it would gain legitimacy. At first, Superman resists. He understands the danger immediately. This is not a simple possession story. This is the corruption of an icon. But Parallax corners him in the cruelest possible way by threatening innocent lives and forcing Superman into the kind of choice only he would make: save himself from corruption or surrender himself to save the children. So Superman does what Superman always does when the stakes become human. He sacrifices himself. He allows Parallax in. That is what makes this version tragic. Superman is not seduced by fear, power, or rage. He is exploited through compassion. The very quality that makes him heroic becomes the opening through which fear enters him, turning a selfless act into a moment of transformation. For a brief time, the world's greatest protector becomes a vessel for the force he was trying to stop. Visually and symbolically, it is one of the most unsettling reversals Superman can undergo. The figure who usually calms the world is suddenly wrapped in the light of dread, transformed into something that looks like Superman but feels fundamentally wrong. The power is there, the presence is there, but the emotional meaning has changed. The only limitation is that the story ends before the concept can fully unfold. Sinestro intervenes, hoping to reclaim Parallax for himself, and with help from the weaponers of Quard, Superman and Parallax are separated before Yellow Lantern Superman can truly evolve into the nightmare the premise suggests. That makes the moment feel less like a full exploration and more like a glimpse through a crack in the door. And that glimpse matters because it proves the concept works. But if Rebirth shows Yellow Lantern Superman as a brief sacrifice twisted by fear, another universe takes the idea much further. In Injustice, fear does not force its way into Superman from the outside. It finds a version of him already breaking from within. If the main continuity version is tragic, Injustice is catastrophic. Here, Superman does not become vulnerable to fear because of a hostage situation. He becomes vulnerable because grief has already shattered the foundation beneath him. The death of Lois Lane does more than wound him emotionally. It destroys the system of belief that kept his power humane. After Lois dies, Superman stops trusting restraint. He stops believing the world can be protected through mercy, patience, or principle. Pain changes his worldview step by step until control begins to look more reasonable than freedom, and intimidation begins to sound more reliable than hope. That is the opening Sinestro understands better than anyone. Sinestro's genius has never been simple villainy. He believes fear works. He believes people behave best when they know exactly how badly they can be punished. And when he looks at Injustice Superman, he does not see a hero who has fallen too far to save. He sees a grieving God already moving toward the same philosophy from a different direction. That is why the Yellow Lantern ring fits this Superman so well. It is not merely a weapon handed to him from outside. It becomes an extension of everything already taking shape inside him: his rage, his loss, his need to make sure no one can ever hurt the world the way it hurt him. The ring gives that emotional collapse structure. It gives his grief a doctrine. This is what makes Injustice Yellow Lantern Superman so much more frightening than a standard evil Superman story. He does not see himself as a monster. He still believes he is protecting people. But the method has changed so completely that protection becomes domination and justice becomes fear-backed obedience. He has not abandoned his desire to save the world. He has corrupted it. And once Superman crosses that line, the symbolism becomes devastating. The man who once represented compassion now stands beside Sinestro, one of DC's greatest apostles of fear, as though the universe's brightest icon has been repurposed into proof that hope no longer works. That is not just a dark turn. It is an ideological collapse. At that point, Yellow Lantern Superman is no longer just an interesting alternate version. He becomes the answer to a much more dangerous question. What happens when a hero powerful enough to save the world decides the only way to protect it is to make it afraid of him? Once that question is answered in action, the scale of the threat becomes impossible to ignore. Once Superman is carrying a Yellow Lantern ring, the issue is no longer whether he is formidable. Superman alone is already a nightmare for almost any opponent. What the ring does is take that absurd baseline and expand it outward, adding versatility, psychological warfare, and an emotional power source tied directly to fear. That matters because Superman does not need a ring to become relevant in a cosmic fight. He is already relevant the moment he arrives. The ring does not create his threat level from nothing. It turns an already overwhelming physical force into something even more oppressive, a being who can overpower bodies, destabilize minds, and project fear with the credibility of near limitless strength behind it. In Injustice, that escalation becomes brutally clear. Yellow Lantern's Superman endures attacks from figures tied to the upper reaches of Green Lantern mythology and keeps going with the kind of certainty that makes resistance feel temporary. He's not acting like a Lantern who happens to be strong. He's acting like Superman after fear has been added to every advantage he already had. The defining feat is the moment he seizes Ganthet and Mogo and drives them into the sun, destroying them in an act that feels less like a fight and more like the universe failing to stop him. On a power scaling level, it is enormous. On a storytelling level, it is even more unsettling because it shows Superman overpowering beings linked to the very architecture of Lantern lore, as though they are obstacles rather than institutions. That is what pushes Yellow Lantern's Superman into beyond Omega territory. He is not simply stronger than before. He becomes the kind of being who can impose himself on cosmic systems, not just individuals. And the most unsettling part is that brute force is only half the problem. Fear remains central. This version of Superman does not merely defeat enemies physically. He can break them mentally before the decisive blow ever lands. That combination is what makes the form so dangerous. Near invulnerability, impossible speed, overwhelming force, and the ability to weaponize fear at a psychological level create a threat that is total rather than specialized. He's not just hard to beat in combat. He's built to make opposition collapse emotionally, symbolically, and strategically. Even with the limited number of appearances DC has given the concept, the implication is obvious. Yellow Lantern's Superman is not just another cosmic variation in a genre full of them. He is what happens when one of the most powerful heroes in comics is aligned with a force designed to dominate rather than inspire. And once that happens, stronger Superman is no longer a big enough description for what he has become. In the end, Yellow Lantern's Superman is not compelling just because he is more powerful than normal Superman. Comics have no shortage of power-ups, alternate forms, and cosmic transformations. What makes this version unforgettable is that it changes Superman at the level of meaning. It turns a symbol of hope into an instrument of fear. That is why Beyond Omega fits him so well. Superman on his own already sits near the top of the scale. Add a Yellow Lantern ring, and the threat becomes more than physical. He can strike, endure, intimidate, invade the mind, weaponize terror, and bend entire confrontations around the psychological gravity of his presence. He becomes not just stronger, but harder to oppose in every possible way. More importantly, he becomes the dark inversion of what Superman is supposed to be. The original Superman tells the world that immense power can still choose compassion. Yellow Lantern. Superman tells the world that immense power can enforce peace through fear. Same body, same might, completely different meaning. That reversal is what makes him so dangerous in a mythic sense. His certainty becomes absolutism. His need to protect becomes the need to control. His refusal to fail mutates into the belief that no one else can be trusted to choose correctly. Fear does not erase Superman's heroic instincts. It corrupts them by convincing him that terror is the most efficient form of safety. That is also why the idea lingers far beyond the actual number of comic pages devoted to it. The appearances may be brief, but the concept is enormous. Yellow Lantern's Superman is one of those forms that instantly expands the imagination because it is not only about power. It is about what happens when the emotional purpose of Superman collapses. So when people call him Beyond Omega, they are not only talking about feats, they are talking about the nightmare hidden inside one of DC's greatest icons. Because if Superman ever stops being the figure who gives the world hope and becomes the figure the world fears most, then the real catastrophe is not just what he can destroy. It is what disappears from the sky when he does.